What began as laughter would end in screaming. Within minutes, one of Victorian London's favourite winter pastimes would become a mass drowning. On a bitter January afternoon in 1867, thousands of Londoners gathered for what should have been a simple winter pleasure. The frost had transformed the city, muting its noise, whitening its edges, and making even the familiar feel new. Families wrapped against the cold, young men eager to show their skill, children tugging at gloved hands, and spectators looking for diversion in the hard grip of winter. In Regent's Park, the Ornamental Water had frozen into a broad white stage, and by mid-January 1867 it had become one of the most popular sights in the city. It looked safe. It had held before. Nothing about the scene suggested that, within minutes, dozens of those people would be fighting for their lives. The cold that month was exceptional for England. Normally, the surrounding seas keep temperatures from dropping too far or staying low for long, but during that winter the frost endured. Londoners were accustomed to chill, to fog and damp, but not to long spells where water locked itself into silence. Day after day the ice thickened and, as frozen lakes so often do, it began to draw people out onto its surface. Skating in the Victorian period was not only recreation, it was spectacle. Skill could be shown, new skates could be admired, friendships and flirtations unfolded in plain sight while crowds watched from the edges. The lake was no longer simply frozen, it was usable, familiar and trusted. By mid-January the lake had become a destination. Vendors, onlookers, children, office workers free for the afternoon, all drifted towards it. Some came prepared to skate, others simply to be part of the scene. Newspapers of the time described the atmosphere as lively, busy and confident. Yet beneath that confidence was uncertainty. Lake ice is never uniform. It forms in layers responding to air temperature, snowfall and movement in the water below. A cold, still night might add strength. A mild afternoon, a current, or a place where people have already cut or damaged the surface can undo it. When snow settles on top, it can create a porous, weaker structure. To most eyes, however, ice is either there or it isn't, and on this lake that weakness was already waiting. The 14th of January should have been a more serious warning than it proved to be. On that day, the surface cracked and 21 people plunged through. They were rescued, shaken but alive. The incident drew attention, but it also produced a dangerous lesson. The system had worked. People fell in and people were saved. By the next morning, the break had frozen over. What remained was not fear, but familiarity. And so on Tuesday the 15th, they came again, and in greater numbers. Accounts differ in detail, but many suggest that several hundred skaters were on the ice at once, with thousands lining the banks. The pressure was not evenly spread, and certain areas became popular meeting points. Spectators leaned forward to watch particular figures. Children clustered. The combined weight bore down on a surface that may already have been compromised. At roughly 3:30 in the afternoon, the failure began. It was not, survivors said, a single dramatic split that announced itself clearly. Instead, the ice sagged, fractured and then disintegrated across a wide area. A report written soon afterward captured the scale of the emergency. At least 200 persons were struggling in the water and screaming for help. One moment there had been motion and laughter, the next there was a field of broken slabs, people clinging, others vanishing between them. Those who went in met water only a few degrees above freezing. The shock would have been violent. Modern understanding helps explain what they experienced, even if they did not have the language for it. Sudden immersion drives an involuntary gasp and frantic breathing. Anyone who inhaled water at that instant could be in fatal trouble immediately. The heart labours under the abrupt strain, and clear thinking is replaced by urgency and fear. Within minutes, strength ebbs. Cold muscles do not respond as they should. Fingers cannot grip properly, arms fail to pull. Thick coats, skirts, trousers and boots soak through and become punishingly heavy. Many Victorians could not swim, and even those who could might find their skills deserting them in the chaos. People who had expected a harmless fall found themselves in depth, darkness and chaos. Panic changed the physics of the situation. Those still on the ice rushed towards the edges, exactly where rescuers needed space and stability. New cracks opened and solid ground seemed to retreat. The response from the banks was immediate and brave. Park keepers, constables and members of the public ran forward together. Branches were thrust out over the water, ropes appeared, ladders were pushed across the broken surface. Men lay down to distribute their weight, reaching as far as they dared towards the faces that surfaced and then disappeared again. Boats were manoeuvred into the gaps, their occupants hauling people over the sides with numbed hands. It was desperate, exhausting work. Some rescuers were dragged partly in and had to fight free. Others succeeded in pulling out victims only to see them collapse barely conscious on the shore. The rescued were hurried away to nearby buildings, wrapped, rubbed and given what warmth could be found. But not everyone could be reached in time. As afternoon faded, the scale of the loss became clearer. Bodies were recovered where possible, yet many remained beneath the ice. Over the following days, the surface repeatedly froze, slowing the search. Holes had to be cut again and again. Divers descended into water that was murky and bitterly cold. Families gathered, waiting for word, scanning faces, and dreading recognition. Eventually the number was confirmed. 40 people were dead, 39 by drowning, and 1 from hypothermia. That figure were individuals from different walks of life. Workers, youths, people who had come for a simple pleasure at the end of a winter day. The randomness of it haunted those who survived. Some had stood only yards from the worst of the collapse. A few steps, a different decision about where to skate or where to watch, had drawn the line between safety and death. Witnesses also spoke of a change they saw in some victims in the water. After the initial struggle, there could come confusion and then a frightening quietness, as though the person were growing sleepy. Today we recognise that response as part of the body's failure under extreme cold, but to those on the banks it must have been agonising to watch. The dead were carried to the Marylebone workhouse, where the grim process of identification unfolded amid shock, hope and dread. An inquest followed, presided over by the Middlesex coroner Edwin Lancaster. Witness after witness described the sudden collapse, the desperate rescues, the terrible speed at which strength failed in the water. In the end, the jury returned verdicts of accidental death in all 40 cases. Lancaster told the court there was no evidence to suggest that any person was guilty of culpable negligence. Others had testified that the ice itself had been in an unsafe condition for the admission of the public, and yet the disaster unfolded with such rapid force and the attempts at rescue had been so immediate that blame seemed to dissolve into the winter air. Responsibility was hard to fix on any one set of shoulders. The weather had tempted, the ice had misled, and a crowd had behaved as crowds do. Still, the disaster forced those responsible for the park to confront an uncomfortable truth. The lake itself had magnified the loss. In many places the water had been deep enough that once victims slipped beneath the broken ice, reaching them quickly was almost impossible. In the months that followed, recommendations from the inquest and from public pressure led to practical change. The Ornamental Water was partially drained and its bed reworked. Its depth was reduced, reported to around 4 feet in many areas, so that if the surface ever failed again, a person might stand or at least be recovered far more easily. The intention was not to make skating safe. No natural ice could ever be guaranteed. It was to make catastrophe less final. Visitors in later years would see only a pleasant stretch of water, never realising that its shape had been influenced by the memory of those who had drowned there. Yet every contour carried that history. It was a response written into the landscape itself, an attempt to ensure that what happened in January 1867 would never be repeated at the same terrible scale. For the people of London, the memory lingered in sound. They remembered the moment laughter turned to screaming. They remembered strangers running towards danger, not away from it. And they remembered how quickly an ordinary afternoon could vanish. The men, women and children on the ice had trusted what they saw. They believed, as anyone might, that what held yesterday would hold again. Many were saved, 40 were not. For their families, and for those who watched the surface open beneath their neighbours, the winter of 1867 never truly thawed. Of course, this was a terrible tragedy. It happened many years ago, but our thoughts and condolences go out to perhaps the descendants of families who lost people in this terrible disaster. Despite the tragedy, I hope you like the way the information was presented. I'll see you on the next one, and I'll wish you bye-bye for now.